Hello, this is a slide presentation about Confucianism and Daoism. According to the Chinese tradition, there were 100 schools of thought in ancient China. After the infamous burning of the books in 213 BC, only 6 schools survived: Confucianism, Daoism, Moism, Legalism, the Yin-Yang school, and the School of Names. In my presentation, I will focus on the 2 main schools of thought, namely Confucianism and Daoism, but I will briefly tell about the other 4. Moism was the school of knight warriors that was founded by Mo Tzu, who lived in the 5th century BC, and it was organized as an army for hire for the purpose of fighting defensive wars. Paradoxically, Mo Tzu preached the doctrine of universal love as the only principle that could unify China, which at that time represented an array of small, warring states. Legalism, whose main representative was Han Fei Tzu, died in the 3rd century BC, was the school of politicians who devised methods for organizing and keeping in check large areas with vast populations. The main strategy of maintaining order that legalists advocated was the system of punishments. The Yin-Yang school was the school of cosmology and mystical philosophy, represented by the practitioners of occult arts. The oldest surviving manual of divination, called the I Ching, which was written down, according to scholars, around the 12th century BC, was the main text of the school. Finally, the School of Names was the school of logicians, whose main purpose was to study and perfect the art of debate. In spite of the diversity of philosophical schools in ancient China, there were some key ideas to which all of them subscribed. One of such ideas was the concept of Yin and Yang, according to which everything in the universe goes in pairs and develops through the 2 forces that are opposite to each other. The concept of Yin and Yang has 3 dimensions, or layers, which are as follows. Number 1. Every entity in the universe is composed of 2 opposite forces. Number 2. Those 2 opposite forces work in and form a unity. And number 3. Those 2 opposite forces are interlaced with each other. The symbol of Yin and Yang, which you see below, represents all 3 aspects of this concept. Perhaps the greatest Chinese thinker, Confucius, lived in the 6th and 5th centuries BC in the times of turmoil for China. He developed a philosophical system that was based on Chinese traditional values, and he believed that this philosophy, if applied to society, could calm and unify his motherland. In contrast to Moists, who preached universal love, Confucius argued that the state couldn't be organized on the principle of love. In contrast to legalists, who advocated punishments, Confucius argued that family couldn't be united by punishments. Hence, Confucius's famous principle, be benevolent to your friends and be just to your enemies. At the heart of Confucius's social and moral philosophy, preserved in the Analects or the sayings of Confucius, lies the concept of Ren, which is translated into English as love, benevolence, humanness, or human-heartedness. According to Confucius, Ren is a quality that distinguishes man from animals, and it should be cultivated by Junzi, or true gentleman. Confucius taught that the way to cultivate Ren is to follow Li, or propriety. The most important aspect of Li is the so-called 5 key relationships, or proper relations between parent and child, elder and younger sibling, husband and wife, senior and junior friend, subject and ruler. According to the Chinese tradition, the founder of Daoism, Lao Tzu, lived in the 6th century BC and was an older contemporary of Confucius. In the main book of Daoism, Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu focuses on the concept of Tao, which means the way, the path, the road, and on how to connect one's nature or De to the Tao of the universe, which is unnameable, inexhaustible, and eternal. In contrast to Confucius, who advocated the way of the Yang, strong government, respect for authority both in personal and state relationships, Lao Tzu stood for the way of the Yin, the natural way of spontaneity and passivity, the way of the water, yielding, absorbing, and relying on what the Daoists call Wu-Wei. Translated as actionless action, Wu-Wei is another key Daoist concept, which literally means extreme activity through extreme relaxation. In Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu explains his mystical philosophy by saying that in order to achieve something, one should start with the opposite, since the universal law of love consists in the reversal of things. Both Confucianism and Daoism were conceived as philosophies of life. In the course of their evolution, both teachings, however, were turned into religions. This happened for different reasons in Confucianism and Daoism. When China was finally unified under the Han Dynasty, which ruled from the 3rd century BC to the 3rd century AD, Han emperors adopted Confucianism as their state ideology and the basis for state education. Confucius himself was deified and presented as a celestial being who foreknew the future unification of China and formulated the philosophical system that would later cement this unification. As for Daoism, it was transformed into religion as a reaction against the penetration of Buddhism into China in the 1st century AD. Buddhism was seen by the Chinese as a threatening foreign influence, and they responded by creating their own native religion of Daoism, with its own church, priesthood, and rituals. Now, after learning the basics of Confucianism and Daoism, we can see and appreciate the uniqueness of Chinese approach to life. As we already know, for instance, Indian thought is profoundly introverted, and the ideal of Indian sagacity is to know one's inner self. Biblical philosophy, on the contrary, is plainly extroverted, and the Bible tells us that wisdom consists in responding to God's call and following God's word in our earthly life. Chinese thought, as compared to Hinduism and Judaism, is primarily about balance and harmony. A Chinese sage is a person who finds the right balance between yin and yang, between his inner wisdom and his outer existence. Thus, the philosophies of Confucius and Lao Tzu represent the primordial balance of yin and yang in Chinese thought, the balance that was never compromised or broken by any foreign influence. Thank you for listening.